A leading Brexiteer has pointed the finger of blame at Iran, accusing the regime of funding and inciting the attacks on Israel. Brussels has a soft spot for Hamas, a former Brexit Party MEP has claimed, adding that when it came to foreign policy the EU was simply always wrong. Ben Habib was speaking at a time when the EU is riven by divisions in the wake of Saturday's attack by Hamas terrorists on Israel, in which at least 700 people were killed. Specifically, uncertainty remains over whether the EU will pull the plug on almost £600 million, €691 million, in funding for the Palestinian territories, with Oliver Varhelyi, the Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, initially saying it would, only for the Commission itself to counter his statement hours later. For Mr. Habib, the confusion at the heart of the bloc came as no surprise. He told Express, "When I was a member of the EU's Parliament, it was never on the correct side of foreign policy. It still is not." He went on, "Back in 2019, the EU was busy trying to undermine the US when it came to policies on Iran." President Trump had rightly cancelled the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty with the country, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Having promised to disarm, Iran had gone on secretly developing weapons-grade uranium. Instead of backing the US, the EU made enormously complex plans to step around sanctions and continue to trade with Iran. It emboldened the Islamist regime, rather than controlling it. Fast forward 4 years and the Iranian regime was responsible for funding and inciting the attacks on Israel, Mr. Habib argued. He continued, "The EU now does not know how to react. It has a soft spot for the Iranian regime and indeed Hamas. This is the same EU that ignored warnings from the USA and UK not to build Nord Stream 2 and become reliant on Russian fuel." In 2018 MEPs laughed at Mr. Trump's warnings on the subject, Mr. Habib pointed out. He continued, "The result, Germany ignored the call for sanctions against Russia at the outset of the Ukrainian war. It continued to buy Russian oil and gas, pouring over €50 billion into Russian coffers before it began to get off its self-created addition to their fossil fuels. How many more Ukrainian lives must have been lost because of German money going into Russia?" In terms of the latest crisis, Mr. Habib, a vehement opponent of the concept of a European army, said, "The EU is now more than embarrassed by the conflagration in the Middle East. It should be. The EU, as ever, was part of the problem, not the solution. It would therefore be a huge folly if we were to join the EU's defence union or its alternative to NATO, Permanent Structured Cooperation or PESCO. There must be no allowance made for EU foreign policy aims when it comes to the Anglosphere. The EU is simply always wrong.